Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha, Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh thy God, and to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. So the Lord would establish us and bless us to where we would be, well above all other nations of the earth. They would all be subject under us. And all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh thy God. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, and blessed shalt thou be in the field. So within our cities, things would go well, right? When whatever we set our hands to do, and likewise in the field, right? Which goes into, the land, right? The crops, the harvest, everything. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, which are your children. So not only would we have an increase, right, in children, having children more abundantly, but also having children in good health, right? No diseases, good stature. And the fruit of thy ground, which are our crops, and the fruit of thy cattle, and the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. So everything, all right, our animals are going to be healthy. They're going to be populous. So will us and our crops. Blessed shall be thy basket and thy store, right? Your basket is where you would put, you would store or put, food. Okay. And when it's blessed, it means like it's an example would be like a good thing, which is that your baskets are always full, which means that you have good harvest, which means you have good land, right? So it's the Lord is basically saying we would have an increase in everything of good quality and thy store, right? Our storehouses would be full. Okay, because of the blessing wherewith he will bless us in our land. Blessed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and blessed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Okay, so both in the sense of going out, whether it's to war against our enemies and returning, or just in anything, right? You leave your house, you go anywhere, your journey is going to be prosperous. Whatever you set out to do is gonna flourish. Okay. The Lord shall cause thine enemies that rise up against thee to be smitten before thy face. So all of our enemies are going to be smitten before our face, meaning we're going to defeat them, right? We're going to have the upper hand against them. They shall come out against thee one way and flee before thee 7 ways. That is a way to say that they're going to basically stand no chance against us, right? You come to fight against us and you end up fleeing 7 different ways, means that you're going to basically suffer loss. You're going to suffer defeat. So much so that you're going to retreat. The Lord shall command the blessing upon thee in thy storehouses. And your storehouses are where you store your like your pantries, right? And when that's blessed, that means you have an abundance. It's always full. And in all that thou settest thine hand unto, and he shall bless thee in the land which the Lord Yahweh thy God giveth thee. The Lord shall bless thee, or shall establish thee an holy people unto himself. See, so he's going to establish us if we, as Moses is saying here, follow his covenant. He would set us up and establish us as holy, as separate, sanctified unto himself, that everybody would know that these are the holy people of the Lord, right? Look, everything they do is blessed. Everything they touch flourishes. Look at them. The way they conduct themselves is different. And that's going to show forth and be evident that we are God's people. As he hath sworn unto thee, if thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God and walk in his ways. And all the people of the earth shall see that thou art called by the name of the Lord. And that is another way of saying that we are claimed by the Lord. When a man marries a woman, right, he establishes her to be his, she takes on his name, right? She's called by his name, which is to represent that she is taken by him. She's joined by him, right? Or joined onto him. So likewise, in the sense of how a God is joined to his people, that is how we would be known, right? And all the people of the earth would see that. And they shall be afraid of thee. So they're going to fear and revere Israel based on how the Lord would establish us if we were obedient to his ways. And the Lord shall make thee plenteous in goods, in the fruit of thy body, right? Like I mentioned before, having an abundance of children, and in the fruit of thy cattle, having an abundance of cattle, and in the fruit of thy ground, in the land which the Lord sware unto thy fathers to give thee, be in the land of Canaan. And the Lord shall open unto thee his good treasure, the heaven, to give the rain unto thy land in his season, which the treasure, right? The scriptures often liken the storehouse or the treasure or the armory of the Lord as to a place where he stores rain, snow, different, types of weather. Okay, when we go into the word treasure here, you'll see one of the definitions, Iwatazar. It says here, storehouse of God for rain, snow, hail, wind, sea. Okay. So it says here, he'll open his good treasure. The heaven shall give the the rain onto thy land in his season. All right. So at the season, because it's there's a season for planting in which rain would be needed, and to bless all the work of thine hand. And so he's going to give us favorable weather, favorable conditions, to where all the work we put in is going to flourish. And thou shalt lend unto many nations, and thou shalt not borrow, because we're going to have so much abundance. We're going to be the lenders, okay, and not the borrowers. And the Lord shall make thee the head and not the tail. That means we're going to be above and not below, right? We're going to be the heads, not the subjects, not those that are under other nations. And thou shalt be above only, and thou shalt not be beneath. See? If that thou hearken unto the commandment of the Lord thy God, which I command thee this day, to observe and to do them. So that's the condition. And thou shalt not go aside from any of the words which I command thee this day, to the right hand or to the left, which means to deviate, away from the instructions on how to follow the Lord. We're not supposed to do that, to go after other gods to serve them. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord Yahweh thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field, which is the reverse of the blessings, right? Misfortune is going to befall you in the city and in the field, right? Your crops are not going to do well. Your land is going to not yield to you, the best of it, right? Having locusts eating up your crops, having different disasters happening in your city, some pestilence, just misfortune, right? Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store, right? Empty storehouses, famines, droughts. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body. Now your children will now start having sicknesses, defects, miscarriages. The women will be having, and the fruit of thy land, like I described, the increase of thine kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. So it'll be the reverse of all the blessings that we would be getting. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Right? When you go out, either to war against your enemies, or just to go out to out of your house to do whatever, it's not going to flourish. Things are going to start going bad. Okay. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing and vexation and rebuke in all that thou settest thine hand onto for to do. And let's go into that word cursing. All right, which is basically, let's see here, ma'ara, curse, okay, misfortune. So things, once again, emphasizing the point that it's going to be like a negative energy that's just causing everything that we try to do and establish to go wrong. Okay, vexation, which comes as a result of this misfortune, and rebuke, right? Similar in the sense of that vexation, right? Difficulties, calamities, in all that thou settest thine hand onto for to do. So anything we try to establish or to do, it's just not going to work out until thou be destroyed, and until thou perish quickly because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me. So we would go from being head to being the tail, from having an abundance of crops to barely having any because the harvest is not good or the locusts have eaten it all up, to having healthy children to, children with birth defects. All right, having flourishing society to having, a decayed society morally, physically. Everything is going to start to go bad. The Lord shall make the pestilence, like I just mentioned, cleave onto thee. So we would be prone, right, to getting hit with different diseases until he have consumed thee from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. So he'll basically use different forms of judgments to eventually drive us off the land. The Lord shall smite thee with a consumption and with a fever and with an inflammation. Let's go into that word consumption. And these are all different types of sicknesses. Okay. Was that shachapath? It says consuming, wasting disease, a wasting disease of the lungs. Okay. Which doesn't sound good. And like I said, these are different types of sicknesses that we would start to contract and it would start to affect us, right? With the fever and with an inflammation and with an extreme burning, right? Also going into that fever, high temperature, and with the sword and with blasting and with mildew, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. So now, as to where we were a healthy nation, we would now be subject to these sicknesses, to these calamities. The sword will represent the adversaries, right? The weapons of our adversaries, or the destructive force that the Lord would imbue them with to come and against us. Okay, as it says, and with blasting and with mildew. Let's go into that. All right, so blasting. It says here, blight of crops, which is basically like a wind that destroys your crops. Okay, where it makes the conditions bad for the growing of your crops, which would lead to what? A poor harvest, which would lead to food scarcity. Okay, let's go into mildew. Lividness, paleness. Okay, it says from fright or of plants, from drought. So affecting both people and also plants. When people, it refers to paleness of face, right? That lurid greenish color in the countenance of men when smitten with great terror, okay, or illness. And then the second use is of grain, yellowness, paleness, mildew. So the Lord will basically, plague us, affecting both us, our crops. All right, as it says, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. So it'll be continually upon us in our generations. And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron. And the Lord, he has mentioned this before, but expounding on it in the 24th verse, meaning, in context, that the heavens above you will not yield, right, that rain or that ideal weather, okay, for your land. Okay, that's why it mentions like brass, because brass doesn't yield any rain or water for you, meaning it's going to be shut up. Same with the earth, right? And the earth that is under thee shall be iron, and nothing grows out of iron. So verse 24 says, the Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. So not only would you, lack rain, you have different, for example, like a dust storm, which also brings destruction in its form. Okay, droughts. From heaven shall it come down upon thee until thou be destroyed. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. See, remember how, well, actually, he's going to invert it now, right? Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. So if we were to go to war with our enemies, or an enemy nation seeing us in this weakened state approaches to try and take over, they would have the upper hand against us, right? And as it says, thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. So we're going to be put to flight. We're going to retreat. We're going to have our men killed, and having to disgracefully retreat, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And how would that happen? By way of captivity, as we saw later on in the history of Israel, both the northern and the southern kingdom. And thy carcass shall be meat unto the fowls of the air, which means that we wouldn't be in a position to have like a proper burial, right? You just, being slain by these calamities en mass. You just have dead bodies laying around, and that allows for the birds, right? The carcass, the dead body of us, for the birds to come and eat at it, right? Vultures and so on, and onto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. There will be no one to drive them away, okay, and give you that proper burial. The Lord shall smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, and with the scab. Let's go into that botch. That emerods is going into tumors, all right, from inflammation, and more specifically in your private areas. All right. So it says here, botch, boil, inflamed spot, inflammation of man, leprosy of man and beast. All right. So that goes into skin diseases, actual boils, leprosy. So the Lord is not playing around. As he says, the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed. So you're just going to suffer these things. Now let's go into that. The scab. It says here, itch, scab, from an unused meaning to scratch, scurf, from itching. Okay, also here, scurvy. So some form of, probably lice. All right, let's look up here, scurvy. Scurvy. Definition. It says a disease caused by a deficiency in vitamin C, characterized by swollen, bleeding gums, and this is crazy work. And the opening of previously healed wounds, which particularly affected poor nourished sailors. What else they got on here? Let's see. Scurvy, itch. Okay, it says here, but it describes the intense itching, irritation, and skin changes like rough, scaly skin, red bumps around hair follicles, and easy bruising caused by severe vitamin C deficiency, leading to compromised skin and connective tissue, with corkscrew hairs and poor wound healing being classic signs. That's very undesirable, but it's a part of a curse. Okay. And with the itch, which likely is similar to that, right? An itch, an eruptive disease, boils and all of that, whereof thou canst not be healed. So you're going to have to deal with it. Verse 28, the Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. Okay, and when you go into that madness, it's like being crazed. Okay, basically being driven crazy or driven mad with with these calamities, with these plagues, right? Craziness, furious, madness, right? With all this misfortune that befalls you, because typically that's what ends up happening. You go through enough hell, you get angry, and it eventually just drives you, crazy. All right, blindness. Let's see what we got for that. Okay, actual blindness. Right, it says here, i.e. with blind staggers, making them helplessly wild. Going into, these physical plagues, right? And astonishment of heart, which is like terror of the mind. And thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness. And that grope is like to feel out, Like they'll talk about somebody got groped, they got felt, right? But in this case, it's saying like you're gonna be blind and you're gonna grope, like how a blind person gropes to feel where they're going on the wall and so on. But for you, you're gonna grope in the noonday, in the midday where there's light, where you should be able to see, as a blind person who is groping in darkness, trying to find their way around. And thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed. So you're going to be constantly oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. Nobody's going to deliver us. And that's why if you look at majority of the history of Israel, from the point of um, you know, getting into the land and then beginning our disobedience, it's really been a story of captivity after captivity after captivity. Okay. And nobody delivered us. You know, it was just temporary reprieve or just one transition of captors to another. Why was that? Because of the curse that we suffered for our disobedience. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. And you have many forms of this, right? You have this in the sense of, you know, actual idolatry because of adultery because of the wickedness in the land. But also, you also have this in the form of being helpless, right? Having your actual wife taken, you know, from you, which we experience in different captivities, also up until, you know, our most recent, what people often think about with the, you know, the transatlantic slave trade and that whole time period, all right, where, you know, both Southern Kingdom and Northern Kingdom suffered similar atrocities, different in, you know, in their own sense, but similar in the sense of heinous crimes and atrocities committed against us by the hand of Esau Edom. Okay, another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Why? Because we would no longer be the head, right? If you're a captive or you're subject onto another, you're working. This is more labor than it is you building your own house or having your own vineyard. No, you're building a house for someone. Okay, and you're not dwelling therein because it's not yours. You're working, right? Thou shalt plant a vineyard and shall not gather the grapes thereof. And whether you are planting it for yourself and then another nation comes and takes it over along with you, or you're captive in another land and that's your job, right? You're laboring for them. Thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes, and thou shalt not eat thereof, right? Because you're not gonna have the power in your hands to do anything about it. It will be for the adversaries or the foreign nations that come and oppress you and take you over. And they take what's yours, your belongings, right? As it says, thine ass shall be violently taken away from before thy face, right, in your presence, and shall not be restored to thee. Because you're not going to have any justice or any power to get it back. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. And that's when they divide the spoil, which eventually would include you. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. That is, and the given is through slavery, right? Being sold unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, right? So you're going to desire to go with them or be with them, but you can't because you're now a captive and your family's being sold and you're being sold and you're being sent to another part of the land wherever you don't know, you know, and you're just watching your family be split. And there shall be no might in thine hand. And like I said, remember, this is a curse that the Lord said will be upon us generation after generation. So we experienced this at different points in time in history. All right. Although, you know, some of the most prevalent or most climactic times of intensities of these curses, you know, were in some more particular captivities, right? Some being the most recent one, like I mentioned, the American captivity, with the slave trade happening right leading into it. Okay, but we were sold as slaves, you know, during the Roman captivity, okay, as well, the Greeks, and even before that. As it says, there's going to be no might in your hand, the fruit of thy land, and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. See that? Because you're going to be under them. and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always, as opposed to how we read up above that we would be blessed and we would be the lenders and not the borrowers. Here we would be subject, we would be on the bottom. So that thou shalt be mad for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see, right? It's going to drive you crazy. You're going to be upset. You're going to lose your mind having to experience this and live like this for the things you witness, the things you have to endure. The Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch, which also goes into that inflammation as well, that cannot be healed. And that springs off of different, joint pains, once again, sicknesses, diseases, from the sole of thy foot onto the top of thy head. And the Lord would do all this to the point where we wouldn't get any rest. Why? So he can drill it into your mind that these are the consequences for disobeying him. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, onto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. And guess what? Once again, this happened, over and over again, right? In the times when we actually did have kings, in kingship over us, right? For example, the northern kingdom, I believe the last king there was Hoshea, which he also got cooked, and same with the southern kingdom, right? And even in the point when we didn't have kings set up over us, the royal line, right? The line of the kings or the previous kings which we had over us would come back in the reincarnation along with us in captivity, okay? Including the king that the Lord was set up over us under Yahushua being King David, right? And the rest of the other royal line, they would all be in captivity with us. Okay, so the Lord is saying here, basically, none of you shall escape, right? And wherever we would be, as it says, we would be sent captive. It says there, you're going to serve other gods, wood and stone. Why? Because eventually, over a period of time, as you saw happen during the Hellenization period, it was the same kind of thing. That's what caused Jake to go into, different living in different ways and different customs and sort of picking up after the land in which they served captivity. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. Okay, that's a reproach, a mockery among all nations whither the Lord shall lead thee. Thou shalt carry much seed into the field, and shalt gather but little in. So you take a lot to go and plant, but the harvest you bring in only few. Why? For the locust shall consume it, and that's a plague the Lord will send upon us. Thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but shall neither drink the drink of the wine, nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. So you plant it, you do the work, but when you go to reap the actual, benefit of it, is going to be little to none because the Lord would have destroyed it. Thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coast. So you'll plant olive trees, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with the oil, for thine olive shall cast its fruit, meaning the fruit is either gonna fall before it's ripe or it's gonna rot to the point where you can't use it. Even though you've planted it, you can't get the benefit of the actual oil from the olives. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. Okay, so you have children, but you can't actually enjoy the pleasure of having children because they're in captivity. And so are you. Being sold, being forced into labor, sometimes even having children just for work, just to be bred for work. And you can't even really enjoy or claim them as like your child. They had a concept of breeders where they would take slaves that were, that were built strong, and they would match like, okay, this across even different plantations, right? I have a male slave and he's built this kind of way, and they're going to get a female and they're going to say, okay, these two would bring forth a nice, strong, healthy slave. So have them, breed is what they called it. And yeah, there would be your children or your offspring, but you're just known as breeders. Your job is just to have children that are not for your enjoyment, but for the servants or the service of your captors. All thy trees and fruit of thy land shall the locust consume. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Okay, that is the heathens among us, right? They're gonna come up, right? They're gonna come up and have the upper hand over us, be more successful. And we're not. It's not that we're gonna stay in our where we're at. We're gonna come down low, low, low under them. Even the strangers that in back then at this time, having the mixed multitude and the Egyptians and so on that were hewers of wood and drawers of water for us, even they, all right, which were below us at one point, would have the upper hand above us. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. See, we would now become the borrowers, and we can't lend to him because we don't have. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. What does that mean? We're going to be on the bottom. We're going to be subject under them. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee. You see that? So it's not going to be just in that generation that you heard it, but it's going to pursue you, meaning it's going to be recurringly happening to you over and over and over again, continuously. So long as you continue to disobey the Lord and you've broken his covenant, these curses are going to follow you and overtake thee till thou be destroyed. Because and now we are destroyed. When you look at the state and the condition of our people today, they're in a destroyed state compared to how they were created to be. And that is because of how effective and intense these curses have become upon us. Because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God. See, because of your disobedience and not listening to the Lord, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee, these curses, for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. Now, that sign, when you go into that and wonder, it goes into a token, okay, or a sign. And so, as much as they were to punish us, they were also an indicator, okay, because by these by these signs or these curses being upon us, initially it would be to differentiate and say, hey, see, those people are the ones that disobeyed their God, because you see the things that's happening to them, you see the state they're in, that's because they disobeyed their God. So it's a sign, right, of our disobedience. But eventually through time, as you know, we fell away from our heritage and so on, through the intensity of these curses, those same very curses became a sign to now identify who we are in these last days, because they would be on our seed forever, right? Until the Lord takes it off. So no matter what we call ourselves or what we look like, we would be able to link ourselves back to our ancestors, because by what we all have in common, which is the sign or the curse. So if the same curses that befell them then are befalling us now, we know that we are that seed, okay, that this curse has pursued and overtaken from generation to generation to generation. Verse 47, because thou servest not the Lord Yahweh thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. So because of you not being grateful and happily serving the Lord, and instead you deviated and served other idols and broke his covenant, that's why these curses will come upon you. Therefore thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness. Why? Because we would lose all the things we had, and we would now lack and be hungry, both literal and figuratively, right? And meaning you're always in need, okay? And thirsty and naked. That means you're wanting, you're lacking. And what? In want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. And that is what? Our enemies. And in past times, it was different nations in which the yoke represented captivity, right? Us becoming their servants and slaves and laborers. And now the one who put the yoke upon our neck is Esau, Edom. And quite literally in most recent times, being in terms of our captivity, the beginnings of our captivities, he literally put a yoke of iron upon our necks. Okay, as slaves. And the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. So a nation whose language we're not going to speak, okay, but the Lord would bring them against us, okay, swift from one end of the earth. Now, when you look, yes, we've had different, nations, different captivities that have come over us, but some of the most intense and fiercest have been the nations in which the people, right, were by nationality the Edomites. Okay, whether they came as the Greeks, right, or as the Romans, or as the Europeans, the conquistadors, and so on. In when they came as the Greeks, they came all the way from the west, right, swiftly upon us. Same thing with as from the Romans, they came all the way from the west, from where we were, and even as the Europeans, because we were in different parts of the world, but the bulk of us were in the interiors of Africa, and guess where they came from? Okay, and came to the coasts. And what did they do? Right, verse 50, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of old, nor shew favor to the young. So they're not going to care whether you're old or young. They're not even going to care, of what age you are. To them, you're just going to be prey, spoil. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land until thou be destroyed. And what does that represent? While we were in the land and the Lord brought adversaries against us, that was literal. But in locations where we didn't necessarily have, say, cattle and so on, that represented the riches or the goods that we did have, the valuables that they took from us until we were left with nothing. And then eventually they took us as well. Which also shall not leave thee, right? Either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thine kind, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. So they'll take everything. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, which are your cities, until thy high and fenced walls come down, wherein thou trustest. So our fortresses, our defense cities, they would besiege us, the enemies the Lord would send against us, until eventually they were able to overcome us throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates throughout all thy land, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. And when he sent the Assyrians, they besieged us, right, the northern kingdom, for a year, over a year, eventually breaking through and then killing and deporting them. And guess what happened? The Assyrians tried it, right? It was successful for a period of time, but not fully, because they couldn't get into Jerusalem under Sennacherib. But the Babylonians came and they succeeded. And then we built back up the temple, we built back up the walls and everything. Then guess what? The Romans came and did it. Okay? And that siege in essence just represents them coming against us, but also in the literal sense of actually laying siege to us, right? And destroying our walls. Verse 53, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and thy daughters. That's cannibalism. Okay, and Moses is gonna explain why, or what will lead to that. Right, which the Lord thy God giveth thee in the siege and in the straitness, which is the difficulty, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. See, so being in the siege, in the actual difficulty of that, we would end up having nothing left, and eventually resorting to what? Eating your children and so on. So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil toward his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children which he shall leave. And I'm going to read this in the NLT as well. But it's saying basically, why is it that, what is going to symbolize that eye being evil? Because of the difficulty, right? Because of the hard times. So it says, the most tender-hearted man in the NLT among you will have no compassion for his own brother, his beloved wife, and his surviving children. And then you see that colon at the end of verse 54. It means verse 55 is connected to it. It's going to expound on it. All right. So it says the reason it's saying that he's not going to, his eye is going to be evil towards them is because, verse 55, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat. Because remember, reading up into verse 53, that siege and that difficulty and that starvation would cause them to start eating each other, including their children. And it's saying here, even the most tender-hearted man, things are going to get so tough that not only are they going to get so vile that he's going to eat his children, but he's not going to share it. Okay, as it says, he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat, because he hath nothing left him in the siege. Because it's so intense, they're so hungry that now they're resorting to eating their own children. And, and in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. And I'll read this part of the NLT as well. It says, he will refuse to share with them the flesh of his the flesh he is devouring, the flesh of one of his own children, because he has nothing else to eat during the siege and terrible distress that your enemy will inflict on all your towns. And there was an account of this in the book of Josephus during the siege of 70, during the time of 70 AD, where you had a woman where, when there was no food left, you had the the zealots that were going through in the midst of Jerusalem trying to find people who had any rations or so on, because they had burnt the food. And then they basically came across her. And I think it said that they smelled like a smell of like burning human flesh. Like, it was so disgusting. She ended up eating her own child because she figured that it would be better that way. It would be more useful that way than if the child had to just like try to survive the siege, because she couldn't even breastfeed it because she wasn't even nourished. So she ended up eating it. Okay. And basically trying to hide it so nobody else would find it to get any piece of that, which is beyond crazy work. That's top level abomination right there. But that's the difficulty in which we would be in. Okay, verse 56, the tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness. So she's so tender, she won't even want to walk, on the ground, right? Being basically representing the delicateness of them. Her eye shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter, and toward her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in thy gates. So she's going to be eating her children. And just like I think it's in the book of Kings, it talks about the two mothers that agreed to eat their children, and then one went and hid her son after they ate they ate the first one's son, because in her mind, well, she's like, well, we'll eat yours, but God, you eat mine. But if worse came to worse, she'd eat her own. Okay, but Moses was describing here the difficulties, right, that we would go through for disobeying the Lord, the hardships, that it would get this bad. Okay, in the literal sense, that is. Verse 58, if thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law, which are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and fearful name, the Lord thy God, right? Yahweh thy God. And this shows basically how that difficulty would cause, Israel to turn one on another, right? And commit these heinous crimes and acts. Verse 59. Then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, right? So if you refuse to observe to do his words, he will make thy plagues wonderful, meaning, something to be surprised at, to be astonished at, not wonderful in a good sense. And the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou was afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. So they're going to stick to you. You're going to be subject unto them. Also every sickness and every plague, which is not written in in the book of this law, them will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. And that's why our people have been subject to that. Okay, we've been subject to all forms, different forms of these curses throughout our generations. And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of the Lord thy God. Because remember, we became like stars of heaven, meaning innumerable, right? Very, very much in population, because that was a blessing of the Lord, that our offspring, the fruit of our body, would be blessed and plenteous. But once the Lord started to curse us, or would start to curse us, the reverse will start to happen. And it shall come to pass that the Lord, Yahweh, or that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught because you pissed him off, right? So just as happy and eager as he was to bless us and increase us, he will be that eager to bring destruction upon us. And ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. Guess what? Are we in the land today? Not as a nation. That was a part of the curse, that eventually we would be taken out of the land. And what happened? The Lord fired the warning shots, right? The northern kingdom eventually didn't listen. They got taken up out of there. They weren't returned back there since. The southern kingdom saw that, and then they still didn't learn. Then they got taken up out of there, right, when the Babylonians came. But then the Lord had mercy and brought us back into the land. And then, well, that wasn't enough, right, through the Persian and the Greek and the Roman captivity, and eventually they all say, all right, get up out of there. Right? Verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth, even unto the other. And how would that happen? Right? One of the main ways was by captivity. Okay? Because when you're taken captive, you're oftentimes, rounded up and taken from your land to another. All right. And this happened all, throughout different points in time, being sold, right? Sometimes even fleeing, having your land taken over. And then before we know it, and even going into the transatlantic slave trade. At that point, we were just taken in bulk and just, shipped all over as slaves. Guess what? They did something similar to the Northern Kingdom. When they came over here and they found them, they said, oh, these are slaves. We're going to take them back. We're going to take some of them back as slaves back to Europe. So we're literally scattered in all the earth. And the Lord did it over time through various means. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So in being scattered there, you have Israelites that are in different parts of the world today, in India, right? Worshiping, their Hindu gods over there over the different generations. You got some Hindu gods, some Buddhists, some, people of different religions that are following those things, not even knowing that they're not even heathens, that they're Israelites, but they're living like the people that are around them, because that's all they know. Generation after generation after generation, bowing down to statues and all that. Completely gone from what the Lord set us up to be. That was a curse from the Lord. Verse 65, and among these nations thou shalt find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. Okay, and that's the case. It's in wherever we've been scattered, it's been difficult, right? We've been at the bottom in that area. You may have a couple Israelites that, quote unquote, at least think they made it or live a bit comfortably, but the majority are not. Okay. It said, because the curses are still befalling you in those areas. Remember, it said, the stranger that is among you shall get up very high above you. So even if you look like them, you would be if you go to India, for example, you would be a part of the low class. If you go to China, you would be part of the low class over there, because the curses will still pursue you. You could look like them, you could talk like them, you could eat what they eat, but you're an Israelite and in spirit, so the Lord is going to have you be unsuccessful like the rest of them. As it says here, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart. Okay, that is fearfulness of mind, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. Why? Because you're constantly, every so often you'll have those moments, those midlife crises and so on and so forth, of being afraid, right? Of being sorrowful, of why is it that you're in this condition? Why are you at the bottom? Why can't you be at the top? Why you always got to work? Why is the things not working out for you? Well, that's a curse. It's deliberately bad to make you think like that because it's a curse. That's a part of the punishment. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee. And this once again, like I said, this happened um, in different captivities that we were in, but heavily, all right, real heavily here in Babylon. Okay. Whereas it says, thy life shall hang in the balance, or shall hang in doubt before thee. You're not going to be sure if you're going to make it to the next day or not. And thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have none assurance of thy life. Once again, it's not assured to you, right? Like the saying goes, yesterday is gone, tomorrow may never come, but today is such and such, then the quote goes on. But in this case, it's like, you don't even know if you'll make it. There's that song by Ice Cube. Was it today is gonna be a good day or something like that? It's like yeah, that song. He mentions in there, right? I forget which part, but he mentions in there basically like, it's another day, right? But he's not sure if he's gonna make it back today, but that's just life. Okay. So it says here, in the morning thou shalt say, would to God it were evening. And at even thou shalt say, would God it were morning, which is like, it's like saying, if only it was evening, or if only it was morning, right? Which is kind of like also hoping to make it through, right? Make it through that day. Okay. And make it to another day. For the fear of thine heart, wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see, for the things we'll see and experience. Verse 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. And the Egypt here is symbolic of captivity, okay, of slavery, of being a bondman and a bondwoman, just like we were in ancient Egypt, but this time with ships. And we know this isn't talking about the actual land of ancient Egypt, because Israel as a nation was not taken back into Egypt, all right, to serve slavery. Okay, when the Lord delivered us out of Egypt, out of ancient Egypt, and we were brought back into the land, if you go throughout the history of how things transpired, the northern kingdom got taken out the land, got sent captive into Assyria, and then from there they came to the Americas, right? And then the southern kingdom got taken to Babylon, as captive, and then they were allowed to return back, and then had to deal with the Greeks and then the Romans and all that stuff there. But as a nation, as a whole, we weren't brought back into Egypt, okay, as it says, with ships to serve captivity, right? So as it says, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. And remember, when you read in the book of Exodus, even really the Torah, coming out of Egypt, right, that there was a path, a certain way that we took, where the Lord was speaking, right, onto Israel through Moses and directing them. And he even told them, right, before he drowned the Egyptians, these Egyptians that you see today, thou shalt basically see them no more again. So when the Lord says that, the way, when you go into the way, it goes into like a path, right, where the Lord spoke unto you, thou shalt see it no more again. And he wasn't lying, because we didn't go as a nation back into Egypt again. And that lets you know that this Egypt that is referring to here in Deuteronomy 28 and 68 is not ancient Egypt, but a modern day Egypt, which Revelation, the 11th chapter, also speaks about that, talking about America. Although in Revelation 11 it's mentioned as that great city, right, which is spiritually known as Sodom and Egypt. Second Esdras, the 15th chapter, and the first few verses also mention that Egypt, right, I shall not now suffer my people to dwell in the land of Egypt again. That Egypt is used symbolically in some of these verses to refer to America, because this place embodies the spirit of Egypt, both in the customs and the rituals in which they did back then, but also in what Egypt was to us, which was a place of bondage and or captivity. And that's why, as you continue on, it says, and there shall ye be sold unto your enemies for bondmen. A bondman is a slave man, and a bondwoman is a slave woman, and no man shall buy you. So it was here in America primarily, that Israel was brought here, okay, and sold, right, made to be sold, and made to serve captivity, right, and be in bondage like we were in ancient Egypt. And as it says, and no man shall buy you. And the word buy here means to redeem, because it would be an oxymoron, right, to say you're going to be sold to your enemies, but then no man is going to buy you. Let's go into the word buy over here, which says to get, acquire, buy, possess, to acquire, to buy, of God, originating, creating, redeeming his people. And this is really the correct sense of it. And I believe the Blue Letter has updated their definitions here, but the correct sense of this is a redemption, right? Meaning that we wouldn't be, not that we wouldn't be bought as slaves, because clearly that's what he's saying would happen to us. But what he's saying is, when you go into the law, you had the kinsman redeemer who would be able to buy the freedom of their kinsfolk. If their kinsfolk was a bondman or was in some sort of servitude, they could then buy their freedom for them and redeem them. But here the Lord is saying that we wouldn't have anybody to do that for us. And you can look in history and see, when we went through this captivity, when we were in that slavery, there was no redemption for us, right? No man, nobody came, no nation came and try to negotiate our freedom and do any of those things. And that's because the Lord set it up that way as part of the prophecy to be fulfilled. Because we did end up breaking the contract in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, and hence we had to pay the penalty. Okay. And so that brings us to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rachak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.